Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's relax and jump into tonight's case. All she wanted was a blissful wedding day with the love of her life. Was that too much to ask for? Sadly, the best day of her life became the day she would never see tomorrow. In a room filled with music, laughter, and promises, one glass changed everything. A single sip, and everything she had built came crashing down. She didn't see the betrayal coming. She never imagined the faces she loved most would be the ones smiling as her world ended. What happened that night would leave a city heartbroken and a nation asking one question: how could this happen? This is a story everyone must hear, a story that reminds us sometimes love isn't what it seems. Born and raised on the south side of Atlanta, Ayanna was a 28-year-old standing at the peak of everything she had fought for. She was a self-made nurse, a first-generation homeowner, a woman who carried her family's hopes on her back without ever complaining. They called her the one who broke the cycle, the one who proved struggle didn't have to be a life sentence. Her victories weren't loud, but they were steady. Paying off her student loans early, setting up a savings plan for her nephew's future, showing up at every family gathering with a smile and an open hand. To those around her, Ayanna was more than successful. She was the proof that dreams could live, even in the hardest places. And now, in the spring of 2023, she was preparing for the moment many said would complete her story. Her wedding day was just hours away. There was excitement in every conversation, in every text. All her friends told her she deserved her fairy tale ending. She laughed easily those last few days, speaking of honeymoon plans and new beginnings, believing that love would crown everything she had worked for. But not every smile around her was genuine, nor was every hand reaching to celebrate her free of envy. Some who cheered for her happiness carried a weight in their eyes. Some loved her light, but hated that it didn't belong to them. April 14th, 2023, was Ayanna's long-awaited day. The ballroom, where Ayanna stood, shimmered with music, with laughter, with the easy promises of forever. She stood there, beautiful, glowing, her white dress catching the last golden traces of evening light. Someone placed a glass in her hand. She lifted it in gratitude, offering a smile that could have melted any doubt. And in that one moment, as she raised the glass to her lips, Ayanna Brooks unknowingly drank from a cup she should never have touched. But long before her wedding invitations were printed, before the first glass of champagne was poured, a different plan had already been set in motion. Devon Hart, 32 years old, was the man who stood at the altar with Ayanna. The man who smiled for the photos. The man who promised forever. To the world, he was charming, well-spoken, and thoughtful. But behind the tailored suits and easy laughter was a man barely staying afloat. Devon had dreams, big ones, but dreams don't pay bills. His finances were crumbling. He carried debts no one knew about, loans taken out in desperation, credit cards he hadn't made payments on in months. On the outside, he wore confidence like a well-fitted jacket. Inside, he was drowning. Chanel Rivers was 29, Ayanna's best. Friends since grade school. They had shared lockers, secrets, heartbreaks, and promises that nothing and no one would ever come between them. To everyone who saw them together, Chanel was the sister Ayanna never had. But jealousy is a quiet thing. It smiles. It claps when you win. It hugs you when you announce your engagement. And sometimes it whispers in the dark when no one is looking. Chanel smiled through Ayanna's victories. She smiled through the bridal showers, the dress fittings, the congratulations. But inside, every step Ayanna took forward felt like a reminder of what Chanel believed she deserved. It was in that space between envy and opportunity that something unthinkable took root. Nearly a year before the wedding, Devon and Chanel crossed a line they knew they could never uncross. A private affair began in stolen moments and hidden messages. It was a betrayal so layered, so tangled, that neither of them could fully explain how it started or why they didn't stop. They justified it to themselves. They told each other it wasn't real, it was just stress, just loneliness, just confusion. But with every secret meeting, every lie told to Iona's trusting face, they edged closer toward a decision that would leave blood on their hands. To Iona, they were her two biggest supporters, her soon-to-be husband, her childhood best friend. She would have bet her life on the man, and tragically, she did. Because while she planned her future with love in her heart, Devon and Chanel rehearsed a different ending altogether. Smiling, celebrating, waiting, they played their parts to perfection. Because sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones already writing our final scene. The Grand Marlowe Ballroom pulsed with life on April 14th, 2023. It was just after 8 p.m., and inside those tall gilded doors, everything Iona Brooks had ever dreamed of seemed to come alive. The music floated across the chandeliers. Laughter rose above the clink of silverware and glasses, and for a few fleeting hours, it looked like nothing could ever touch the happiness in that room. Guests moved through the space, pausing to admire the ice sculptures, to snap photos in front of the floral walls that Iona had handpicked herself. Her smile never faltered. Every time she turned her head, someone else was hugging her, congratulating her, telling her she had found her forever. Devon Hart stood tall at her side, dashing in a black tuxedo, his arms slipping easily around her waist as the cameras flashed. Chanel Rivers floated nearby, always a step away, beaming like the proud best friend she had always pretended to be. No one watching from the outside would have guessed that two of the people standing closest to Iona were waiting for the right moment to end her story. The night moved in a blur of toasts and dances. Iona twirled across the floor, her laughter lifting into the high ceilings, her dress gliding like a soft cloud behind her. For everyone there, it felt like a celebration of a love story that had conquered everything. But somewhere in the noise, a simple moment was unfolding that would change everything. That as the final round of toasts approached, champagne glasses were being prepared behind the scenes. Somewhere amid the laughter, amid the clinking of glasses, Chanel moved. She looked calm and focused. She reached for the two flutes meant for Iona and Devon, switching them with practiced ease. One glass untouched, one glass tainted. The guests cheered as the MC announced the last toast of the night. Devon took his glass, his hands steady. Chanel handed Iona hers, her fingers brushing the delicate stem, her face betraying nothing. Iona turned to Devon, her eyes bright with the kind of love that believes it is invincible. Devon smiled back, raising his glass. He watched her lift hers. He watched the bubbles dance to the surface. He watched her sip, and in that moment, everything they had planned, every lie they had told, every betrayal they had buried, came to life inside that single, devastating swallow. The room erupted in cheers, glasses clinked, music swelled. But for Iona Brooks, the countdown had already begun. In the time it took to blink, Iona Brooks' future was stolen. She drank, and she never opened her eyes again. What started as a love celebration turned into a day of death. 2 days after Iona Brooks' death, before her family could even finish making funeral arrangements, Devon Hart and Chanel Rivers walked into the Sterling Life Insurance offices in downtown Atlanta. It was April 16th, 2023. Just after 11 a.m., they arrived dressed in black, carrying Iona's paperwork, speaking softly to the front desk staff about the tragic loss of their beloved wife and best friend. They were ushered into a small office, where an agent pulled up the details of Iona's newly signed life insurance policy. Devon leaned forward, his voice low, explaining that they were there to collect the $1.7 million. Chanel sat stiffly beside him, nodding along. They believed it would be simple. After all, it was theirs. To them. But as the agent scrolled through the file, her expression changed. When she looked up, her voice was steady but cold. She informed them that neither of them was listed as the beneficiary. Devon froze, his mouth half open. Chanel stiffened beside him. The agent repeated it again, slower this time. You are not the beneficiaries. The $1.7 million was assigned to Kendall Brooks, Ayana's estranged sister, the one she had quietly made peace with just 3 weeks before the wedding. Devon's disbelief turned to rage within seconds. He slammed his hands on the desk, shouting that it was impossible. He accused the company of stealing what was rightfully his. He demanded that someone fix the mistake immediately. Chanel tried to pull him back, whispering frantically, but Devon was too far gone. He knocked over a chair, kicked at the doorframe, screaming about betrayal and injustice, as security rushed to the room. Guests in the waiting area watched in horror as he was dragged outside, still yelling Ayana's name. Inside the insurance office, after the door slammed shut and silence returned, the agent quietly flagged the file. She made a call to the Atlanta Police Department, because 2 people demanding $1.7 million, 2 days after a bride collapsed on her wedding night, was not something that could be ignored. Derek and Ayana Cole, the people she took into her home, the people she gave her heart to, repaid her with the most horrific betrayal imaginable. They murdered the woman who had selflessly cared for them, who had believed in them even when the rest of the world had written them off. The complexity of this case lies not just in the brutal nature of the crime, but in the emotional manipulation that led to it. Derek's years of resentment and anger festered until they boiled over into murder. And Ayana, a young girl caught in the emotional crossfire, found herself complicit in the unthinkable. But it raises a critical question. Can we ever truly know the people closest to us? Oprah believed in love and second chances, but could she have known the depths of betrayal Derek and Ayana were capable of? How much can we really trust the ones we let into our lives, the ones we love, the ones we protect? When does loyalty cross the line into something far darker, something unrecognizable, something deadly? These questions linger long after the trial ends, after the final sentence is passed. They challenge us to reflect on our own relationships, to ask ourselves how well we really know the people closest to us. Are we truly seeing them for who they are? Or are we seeing only what we want to see? As we close this chapter, the story of Oprah Daniels, her life, her death, and the ultimate betrayal by the people she loved, leaves us with more than just a haunting memory. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of manipulation, the darkness that can lie beneath the surface of those we trust, and the devastating consequences of emotional manipulation. Now, I turn to you, the viewer. What do you think about the nature of betrayal? Have you ever been deceived by someone you trusted? How far do you think loyalty can go before it becomes something far darker? And what does justice truly look like in a case like this, where a woman, a mother, a friend, was taken from the world by the very people she believed in? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Engage with this story. Reflect on the lessons it teaches us about trust, betrayal, and the complexities of human relationships. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep. And until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company. Oprah Daniels was born into a world of hardship, raised in a small, economically struggling town in Florida. Her early years were shaped by instability. Her father was largely absent, while her mother, though physically present, was emotionally distant, overwhelmed by her own struggles. Oprah quickly learned that love was not a given, and that survival often meant standing alone. As a young child, she found herself taking care of her younger siblings, shouldering responsibilities far beyond her years. The emotional neglect left its mark, but it also instilled a deep resilience within her. In the absence of love, she learned to protect herself and push forward, determined not to let her circumstances define her. Despite the emotional toll of her upbringing, Oprah was determined to create a different life for herself. Education became her escape. She threw herself into school, using books as her refuge. By the time she graduated high school, Oprah was already planning her future, knowing that her best chance at a better life lay in her own hands. She dreamed of making a difference, of helping others who were as lost as she had once felt. That dream led her to a career in law enforcement. Oprah joined the police academy at 23, driven by a desire to help others and to prove that she could rise above the pain of her past. She started at the bottom, working her way up with sheer determination and a deep compassion for those in need. She became known for her ability to handle even the most challenging situations with grace, her calm presence bringing comfort to people in crisis. As Oprah rose through the ranks to become a deputy sheriff, her career became her pride, a symbol of her strength and resilience. It was the one place in her life where she had complete control, where she could make a difference and find purpose. For Oprah, her work wasn't just a job. It was a testament to her ability to rebuild, to heal, and to prove that she could rise above the past that had tried to hold her down. After her first marriage ended in divorce, Oprah embraced her independence and focused on her career. The divorce, though painful, became a turning point. Oprah had married young, hoping to find the love and stability that had always eluded her, but she soon discovered that her first husband's infidelity and emotional abuse could not be fixed by love alone. She left the marriage with a sense of emptiness, but also a renewed sense of determination. She knew that she deserved more than what she had been given, and she wasn't willing to settle for anything less. Oprah threw herself into her work, finding solace and strength in her career. The scars of her first marriage remained, but they no longer defined her. Oprah had long dreamed of a second chance at love, and in 2016, she believed she had found it in Derek Cole. Derek, 32, was 12 years younger than Oprah, and came with a troubled past, a former felon with no job and no formal education. Derek Cole was a man of contrasts. At 32 years old, he had lived a life that was far from easy. Raised in a broken family, Derek knew what it was like to feel abandoned. His childhood was marked by neglect and hardship, and as a young man, he made choices that would shape the rest of his life. From petty theft to a felony conviction, Derek's criminal record was long and filled with mistakes. He never had the luxury of stability or support. Instead, he was forced to learn how to survive on his own. But Derek wasn't without charm. He knew how to talk his way into almost anything, whether it was getting out of trouble or into someone's life. He could be captivating, disarming, and convincing when he wanted to be. And that's exactly what he did with Oprah. She saw a man who, despite his troubled past, had potential. She saw someone who could turn his life around, someone who could thrive if given the right opportunity. Derek, aware of Oprah's compassion and her belief in second chances, used that to his advantage. He fed her the right words, told her what she needed to hear. In return, Oprah opened her heart and her life to him. The cracks in Derek's character, however, were never too far beneath the surface. His troubled past never truly left him, He struggled with his own demons' feelings of inadequacy and resentment that he couldn't shake. He was uneducated, jobless, and increasingly bitter toward Oprah's success. He didn't want to live in the shadow of her accomplishments. He wanted to tear her down so that he could stand on equal ground. Derek's feelings of inadequacy became anger, and that anger would eventually lead him down a dark path. Derek wasn't a man who dealt well with frustration. He wanted to be the one in control. As Oprah's career continued to flourish, Derek's resentment festered. The love that once seemed genuine began to feel like a burden to him. What started as a relationship built on hope slowly devolved into a toxic mix of manipulation and emotional abuse. Derek felt trapped, suffocated by Oprah's success and the life she had built without him. Iona Cole, Derek's 17-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, was a girl caught between two worlds. Raised by a mother who struggled with addiction and a father who was emotionally absent, Iona had known more than her fair share of hardship. By the time Oprah entered her life, Iona had already seen enough pain to last a lifetime. Oprah was a beacon of light in a life that had been filled with darkness. She took Iona in without hesitation, offering her a safe home, a steady environment, and the love that Iona had never experienced. Oprah was kind, nurturing, and patient, offering Iona a second chance at a stable life. She provided for Iona, gave her an education, and treated her like her own child. For a while, Iona embraced this new life, grateful for the opportunity to have a mother who truly cared for her. But Iona's gratitude began to fade as the tension between Derek and Oprah grew. Derek's manipulations became more apparent, and Iona, like her father, began to resent Oprah's authority in the home. She felt torn between her loyalty to her father, who had given her so little, and the woman who had given her everything. She began to see Oprah not as a mother, but as an obstacle to the life Derek wanted, and one that Iona could no longer ignore. The emotional strain of living in a home filled with conflict began to take its toll. Iona, too, began to harbor resentment toward Oprah for the control she had over their lives. The loyalty Iona once felt toward Oprah began to shift as she found herself aligned with her father's anger. Despite these red flags, Oprah saw potential in Derek. She believed in second chances, both in love and life. As time passed, however, cracks began to show in Derek's character. His resentment toward Oprah's success and the life she had built without him started to eat away at him. He felt small under her shadow, and instead of growing alongside her, he began to pull away, increasingly resentful. When she discovered one of his affairs involved a girl 3 years older than Iona, the reality of his betrayal became too much to bear. Oprah filed for divorce, determined to start over and finally rid herself of the toxic relationship. She began removing Derek's name from their joint accounts and made plans to sell the house. She was ready to move on, to reclaim her life and her peace. But Derek, feeling emasculated and betrayed, had other plans. He couldn't bear the thought of losing everything. The resentment that had built up over the years turned into rage, and in his mind, Oprah had to be eliminated. He couldn't allow her to expose him, to take away the life he had grown so comfortable. Derek made a decision that would change everything, a decision that would ultimately cost Oprah her life. The night of February 20th, 2019, was a tragic turn of events. Derek Cole, in interviews with the police, painted a heart-wrenching picture of what happened. He described a serene night, a simple outing with his wife, Oprah, and his daughter, Iona. According to Derek, they had been driving home when they came across a group of beggars. Oprah, true to her compassionate nature, insisted they stop so she could offer them some money. But Derek's account quickly shifted into something more disturbing. He claimed that, as Oprah stepped out of the car, 2 men appeared out of nowhere. In an instant, they attacked Oprah with knives, stabbing her repeatedly. Derek, in his account, painted himself as the helpless bystander, struggling to protect Oprah while Ayanna, too, tried to intervene. The whole ordeal, he claimed, happened so fast the grief Derek expressed seemed sincere. His voice cracked, and tears streamed down his face as he painted the scene of his wife's brutal murder. Ayanna, too, was described as a distraught daughter, crying uncontrollably. The story was tragic, and the emotions appeared genuine. However, as the investigation began, police started to notice inconsistencies. There was something unsettling about Derek's version of events. For one, there were no signs of forced entry into the car. No weapon was found at the scene, and most notably, there was no evidence of a robbery. Oprah's phone was charging at home, her purse was still in the house, and her personal items remained untouched. These were all things you would expect to be taken if the attack had truly been a robbery gone wrong. Suspicion deepened as further investigation revealed more red flags. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras showed no sign of beggars or any attackers on the road where Derek said the incident had taken place. Not only that, but the footage also revealed something more damning. Derek and Ayanna were never even near the location Derek had described. Oprah Daniels was born into a world of hardship, raised in a small, economically struggling town in Florida. Her early years were shaped by instability. Her father was largely absent, while her mother, though physically present, was emotionally distant, overwhelmed by her own struggles. Oprah quickly learned that love was not a given, and that survival often meant standing alone. As a young child, she found herself taking care of her younger siblings, shouldering responsibilities far beyond her years. The emotional neglect left its mark, but it also instilled a deep resilience within her. In the absence of love, she learned to protect herself and push forward, determined not to let her circumstances define her. Despite the emotional toll of her upbringing, Oprah was determined to create a different life for herself. Education became her escape. She threw herself into school, using books as her refuge. By the time she graduated high school, Oprah was already planning her future, knowing that her best chance at a better life lay in her own hands. She dreamed of making a difference, of helping others who were as lost as she had once felt. That dream led her to a career in law enforcement. Oprah joined the police academy at 23, driven by a desire to help others and to prove that she could rise above the pain of her past. She started at the bottom, working her way up with sheer determination and a deep compassion for those in need. She became known for her ability to handle even the most challenging situations with grace, her calm presence bringing comfort to people in crisis. As Oprah rose through the ranks to become a deputy sheriff, her career became her pride, a symbol of her strength and resilience. It was the one place in her life where she had complete control, where she could make a difference and find purpose. For Oprah, her work wasn't just a job. It was a testament to her ability to rebuild, to heal, and to prove that she could rise above the past that had tried to hold her down. After her first marriage ended in divorce, Oprah embraced her independence and focused on her career. The divorce, though painful, became a turning point. Oprah had married young, hoping to find the love and stability that had always eluded her, but she soon discovered that her first husband's infidelity and emotional abuse could not be fixed by love alone. She left the marriage with a sense of emptiness, but also a renewed sense of determination. She knew that she deserved more than what she had been given, and she wasn't willing to settle for anything less. Oprah threw herself into her work, finding solace and strength in her career. The scars of her first marriage remained, but they no longer defined her. Oprah had long dreamed of a second chance at love, and in 2016, she believed she had found it in Derek Cole. Derek, 32, was 12 years younger than Oprah and came with a troubled past a former felon with no job and no formal education. Derek Cole was a man of contrasts. At 32 years old, he had lived a life that was far from easy. Raised in a broken family, Derek knew what it was like to feel abandoned. His childhood was marked by neglect and hardship, and as a young man, he made choices that would shape the rest of his life. From petty theft to a felony conviction, Derek's criminal record was long and filled with mistakes. He never had the luxury of stability or support. Instead, he was forced to learn how to survive on his own. But Derek wasn't without charm. He knew how to talk his way into almost anything, whether it was getting out of trouble or into someone's life. He could be captivating, disarming, and convincing when he wanted to be. And that's exactly what he did with Oprah. She saw a man who, despite his troubled past, had potential. She saw someone who could turn his life around, someone who could thrive if given the right opportunity. Derek, aware of Oprah's compassion and her belief in second chances, used that to his advantage. He fed her the right words, told her what she needed to hear. In return, Oprah opened her heart and her life to him. The cracks in Derek's character, however, were never too far beneath the surface. His troubled past never truly left him. He struggled with his own demons' feelings of inadequacy and resentment that he couldn't shake. He was uneducated, jobless, and increasingly bitter toward Oprah's success. He didn't want to live in the shadow of her accomplishments. He wanted to tear her down so that he could stand on equal ground. Derek's feelings of inadequacy became anger, and that anger would eventually lead him down a dark path. Derek wasn't a man who dealt well with frustration. He wanted to be the one in control. As Oprah's career continued to flourish, Derek's resentment festered. The love that once seemed genuine began to feel like a burden to him. What started as a relationship built on hope slowly devolved into a toxic mix of manipulation and emotional abuse. Derek felt trapped, suffocated by Oprah's success and the life she had built without him. Ayanna Cole, Derek's 17-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, was a girl caught between two worlds. Raised by a mother who struggled with addiction and a father who was emotionally absent, Ayanna had known more than her fair share of hardship. By the time Oprah entered her life, Ayanna had already seen enough pain to last a lifetime. Oprah was a beacon of light in a life that had been filled with darkness. She took Ayanna in without hesitation, offering her a safe home, a steady environment, and the love that Ayanna had never experienced. Oprah was kind, nurturing, and patient, offering Ayanna a second chance at a stable life. She provided for Ayanna, gave her an education, and treated her like her own child. For a while, Ayanna embraced this new life, grateful for the opportunity to have a mother who truly cared for her. But Ayanna's gratitude began to fade as the tension between Derek and Oprah grew. Derek's manipulations became more apparent, and Ayanna, like her father, began to resent Oprah's authority in the home. She felt torn between her loyalty to her father, who had given her so little, and the woman who had given her everything. She began to see Oprah not as a mother, but as an obstacle to the life Derek wanted, and one that Ayanna could no longer ignore. The emotional strain of living in a home filled with conflict began to take its toll. Ayanna, too, began to harbor resentment toward Oprah for the control she had over their lives. The loyalty Ayanna once felt toward Oprah began to shift as she found herself aligned with her father's anger. Despite these red flags, Oprah saw potential in Derek. She believed in second chances, both in love and life. As time passed, however, cracks began to show in Derek's character. His resentment toward Oprah's success and the life she had built without him started to eat away at him. He felt small under her shadow, and instead of growing alongside her, he began to pull away, increasingly resentful. When she discovered one of his affairs involved a girl 3 years older than Ayanna, the reality of his betrayal became too much to bear. Oprah filed for divorce, determined to start over and finally rid herself of the toxic relationship. She began removing Derek's name from their joint accounts and made plans to sell the house. She was ready to move on, to reclaim her life and her peace. But Derek, feeling emasculated and betrayed, had other plans. He couldn't bear the thought of losing everything. The resentment that had built up over the years turned into rage, and in his mind, Oprah had to be eliminated. He couldn't allow her to expose him, to take away the life he had grown so comfortable. Derek made a decision that would change everything, a decision that would ultimately cost Oprah her life. The night of February 20th, 2019, was a tragic turn of events. Derek Cole, in interviews with the police, painted a heart-wrenching picture of what happened. He described a serene night, a simple outing with his wife, Oprah, and his daughter, Ayanna. According to Derek, they had been driving home when they came across a group of beggars. Oprah, true to her compassionate nature, insisted they stop so she could offer them some money. But Derek's account quickly shifted into something more disturbing. He claimed that, as Oprah stepped out of the car, two men appeared out of nowhere. In an instant, they attacked Oprah with knives, stabbing her repeatedly. Derek, in his account, painted himself as the helpless bystander, struggling to protect Oprah while Ayanna, too, tried to intervene. The whole ordeal, he claimed, happened so fast the grief Derek expressed seemed sincere. His voice cracked, and tears streamed down his face as he painted the scene of his wife's brutal murder. Ayanna, too, was described as a distraught daughter, crying uncontrollably. The story was tragic, and the emotions appeared genuine. However, as the investigation began, police started to notice inconsistencies. There was something unsettling about Derek's version of events. For one, there were no signs of forced entry into the car. No weapon was found at the scene, and most notably, there was no evidence of a robbery. Oprah's phone was charging at home, her purse was still in the house, and her personal items remained untouched. These were all things you would expect to be taken if the attack had truly been a robbery gone wrong. Suspicion deepened as further investigation revealed more red flags. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras showed no sign of beggars or any attackers on the road where Derek said the incident had taken place. Not only that, but the footage also revealed something more damning. Derek and Ayanna were never even near the location Derek had described. And at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in what had once been a candy wrapper, a braid of dark hair, neat, delicate, tied with a faded yellow ribbon. The site became a crime scene within hours. Yellow tape wrapped around the marsh as officers combed through the area, inch by inch. Evidence markers dotted the ground like a roadmap back to a past no one wanted to revisit. The diary was sent to a forensic lab, handled with gloves and patience as technicians worked carefully to dry the pages. When investigators finally read the words inside, they realized they weren't just holding evidence, they were holding the last moments of a little girl's trust. Uncle Adam said, "We're going to see Daddy." I don't believe him. I'm scared. Tears welled in the eyes of hardened detectives who had seen more than their share of tragedy. This wasn't just a missing child. This was a betrayal in its purest form. The Seville Police Department reopened Nia's case that same day. Search warrants were prepared. Past interviews were rewound. Old files, dusty and long forgotten, were pulled back into the center of attention. Michelle Brown, now living quietly with Adams Hill, was asked to come in for questioning. Her lawyer answered instead. Michelle declined to cooperate. She said she had no comment. She said she had no idea why Nia's backpack would be buried out in the marshlands. But Adams was another story. Detectives brought him in quietly. No media, no fanfare. Just a plain room, 2 chairs, and a table. At first, Adams sat calmly, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. His answers were clipped, careful. He said he knew nothing, said he hadn't seen anything that night, but the diary changed everything. When detectives placed it on the table, still dirty, still damp around the edges, something inside Adams shifted. He stared at it too long. His hands trembled. His voice caught when he tried to speak. They didn't push. They let the silence do the work. By the third hour, Adams cracked. He leaned forward, placed his hands flat on the table, and spoke so quietly the detectives had to lean in to hear him. He admitted to being at the carnival that night. He admitted. Michelle told him where to find Nia, told him exactly what to say, told him what time to approach. He admitted he took Nia by the hand, led her away, told her they were going to meet her father. He described how she hesitated, how she looked back toward the crowd, how for a moment he thought she might run, but she didn't. She trusted him. He described driving her to the edge of the marshlands, a place they had scouted weeks earlier. He said he told her everything would be fine, told her she'd see her daddy soon. Then he stopped talking. What he did next, he said. He didn't want to remember, but investigators needed no more words. They had enough. In searching Michelle's belongings, they found more damning evidence. Letters tucked into a storage box, written in her careful, neat handwriting. Some dated months before the carnival, some written just days before. One stood out. After this, it's just us. No past, no mistakes, no more chains to him. It wasn't a single act, it was a plan. A plan nurtured over time, built on anger, on resentment, on a need to erase everything Michelle saw as her failure. The air outside the Middlesex County Courthouse was sharp with winter cold, but inside, the tension was heavier than any storm. People packed into the wooden benches as they waited for the trial everyone had been talking about for months to begin. Michelle Brown entered first. She wore a dark grey suit, her face pale and unreadable, her gaze fixed forward. She barely glanced at the faces turned toward her. There were no tears, no trembling, only a cold stillness. Next came Adams Hill. He shuffled forward in an orange prison jumpsuit. His once proud stance crumbled, his shoulders sagged under the weight of the moment. The charges were read aloud. First-degree murder, conspiracy, child abuse. Each word echoed in the silent room. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted the picture of a mother who saw her child not as a blessing, but as an anchor tying her to a past she desperately wanted to escape. They showed how Michelle and Adams had conspired together, using trust as a weapon against the very person who loved them most. They brought out the diary, the last written words of a little girl who had felt fear but had no one left to protect her. They displayed the letters Michelle had written. They showed the phone records that placed Adams near the carnival grounds on the night Nia disappeared. Through it all, Michelle sat motionless, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes flat. When it was Adams's turn to testify, the room seemed to hold its breath. His voice was low, hoarse, but he spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "She made me do it," he said, his hands clenching the sides of the witness box. "She wanted Nia gone. She said every time she looked at her, she saw the life she hated, the life she wanted to forget." He described how Michelle planned the night, how she directed every move, how she convinced herself that Nia's absence would mean freedom, a clean slate. He didn't excuse what he had done. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply laid the truth bare, piece by painful piece. The defense tried to discredit him, painting him as a coward, a liar. But the evidence spoke louder than any accusation. When the final letter was read aloud after this, "It's just us. No more chains to him." Several jurors looked away, unable to meet the reality staring back at them. The jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. When they returned, the courtroom grew so quiet that every shuffle, every breath, seemed too loud. The foreman stood, hand steady, voice sure, guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of child abuse resulting in death. The verdict for Adams Hill followed swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Life without the possibility of parole. Michelle showed no reaction as the words were spoken. No tears, no pleas. Just the same blank stare she had worn from the moment she stepped into the room. Barely 2 months after the verdict, news broke that shook the town once again. Adams Hill, convicted murderer and once respected youth pastor, was found dead inside his prison cell at Southwood State Prison, stabbed multiple times. Prison officials released a brief statement calling it an inmate altercation. No names were given, no details released. But inside the prison, the story moved faster than guards could contain it. Some said it was random. Others believed something else. Rumors spread quietly. Maybe Tobias, broken by grief, had found a way to reach beyond the courtroom. Maybe justice hadn't ended at sentencing. Of course, nothing was ever proven. Tobias Brown never responded directly to the whispers. When reporters asked, he only said, "I put it in God's hands." And if there was more behind those words, if there was a story that would never be told, he kept it buried with the same quiet strength that had carried him through every awful step of losing his daughter. Meanwhile, Michelle Brown sat alone in a windowless cell, confined to solitary for her protection, 23 hours a day inside 4 cold walls. Even now, she insisted she was innocent. She claimed the letters were misunderstood, claimed Adams had twisted her words, claimed she had been trapped by circumstances beyond her control. But nobody was listening anymore. How far would someone go to escape their past? For Michelle Brown, it was far enough to lose everything she once claimed to love. Far enough to betray the one person who looked up to her without question. Far enough to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. When people speak of betrayal, they often picture quiet moments, silent decisions made behind closed doors. But betrayal doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it screams. Sometimes it walks hand in hand with innocence. Sometimes it leaves behind a small, pink backpack, buried deep in the mud, soaked by years of rain, carrying the final pieces of a truth too heavy for words. Nia Brown didn't just vanish that night. She was led away by people she trusted. And in her final moments, she must have wondered why the ones who promised to protect her were the ones who failed her most. That trust, once broken, echoes longer than any courtroom sentence. It lingers in every unanswered question, every sleepless night, every parent's silent prayer for their child's safety. Michelle sits in a prison cell now, her world reduced to concrete walls and memories she cannot erase. Adams is gone, buried, under the same system that once tried to rehabilitate him. And Tobias Brown walks forward, carrying a weight no father should ever bear. The knowledge that love alone wasn't enough to save his daughter from the people she trusted most. Communities heal, time softens edges, but some losses stay sharp, no matter how many years pass. Story 5, February 20th, 2019. The night Oprah Daniels was murdered, everything seemed normal on the surface. Derek Cole and his daughter Ayanna appeared to be just like any other family, grief-stricken, shocked, trying to cope with the tragedy that had struck their lives. They embraced, they cried, they prayed for strength. They played the part of the devastated husband and daughter, clinging to each other for comfort, surrounded by family and friends who had no idea that the very people who were mourning the loss were the ones responsible for it. But behind the tears and the carefully rehearsed grief, something was terribly wrong. And the truth? It was hidden beneath the surface, in the cold, calculated actions of a father and daughter who had just destroyed the very person who had given them everything. What happened that night? How could two people who were supposed to love her betray her in such a brutal way? The answers would come, but not easily. August 18th, 2015. The Seville Carnival was the highlight of the summer, the kind of event that pulled everyone in. Bright lights, the hum of rides spinning, the sound of children laughing as music filled the air. For most, it was a night of fun, of memories made under the open sky. But for Michelle Brown, this night had a different meaning. She dressed Nia carefully that evening. A yellow dress, the one with little white flowers, freshly ironed. Her hair was done in 2 neat braids, tied with matching yellow ribbons, and slung over her shoulder was her pink backpacks, more worn but loved. Inside, she had packed her favorite toy, a little notebook, and a juice box. Michelle knelt down before they left the apartment, straightened Nia's collar, and smiled. "Tonight's all about you," she said softly. Nia beamed, excited for the rides, for the games, for time with her mother. They arrived just before sunset, the carnival already alive with movement. Michelle bought tickets, let Nia pick out cotton candy, and even played a few games with her. They laughed as Nia tried to win a stuffed bear, missing every shot but never losing her joy. Michelle held her hand tightly, watching her, studying her. To anyone else, it looked like a perfect night between mother and daughter. But Michelle wasn't there for fun. As the sky darkened, the lights of the Ferris wheel lit up, spinning slowly in the distance. Nia tugged at her mother's hand, pointing, her eyes wide. "Can I go on that one?" she asked. Michelle nodded. They made their way through the crowd, the noise of the carnival pressing in from every side. Michelle led Nia to the line, bent down, and brushed a stray hair from her daughter's face. "Wait here, baby, mummy's going to get a soda. I'll be right back." Nia nodded, holding on to her backpack straps, watching her mother walk away. She didn't know it, but this was the moment everything changed. Michelle didn't look back. Adams Hill was already there, standing just beyond the ticket booth, blending in with the other parents, watching. He waited until Michelle was gone, then stepped closer. "Nia," he said, his voice low, friendly, the way she knew it. "Your mummy asked me to take you home. She's not feeling well." Nia looked up, confused. "But she said she was getting a soda." Adams crouched down, smiled. "She wanted me to come get you." "Come on, I'll take you to her." Nia hesitated. She looked back at the line, at the Ferris wheel turning slowly above her, then back at Adams. She trusted him. He had always been around, Mummy's friend, Daddy's friend. She reached out her hand, and that was the last time anyone saw Nia alive. As the carnival lights continued to spin, as laughter echoed through the night, one child disappeared, quietly, without a sound, and no one noticed. Not yet. 9:42 p.m. the call came in. Michelle's voice was frantic, nearly breathless. "My daughter's gone. I can't find her. Please, someone took her." Dispatch didn't waste time. Within minutes, the Seville Police Department arrived at the fairgrounds. Officers quickly locked down the area. The carnival was shut down mid-ride. Music stopped. Games halted. Bright lights that moments ago brought excitement now cast long shadows on confused faces. Firefighters arrived with thermal imaging gear. K-29 units were deployed. Volunteers and off-duty officers spread out, scanning every corner of the grounds. Searchlights lit up the fields and parking lots nearby. Helicopters hovered low overhead. Announcements were made over the loudspeakers. But there was no sign of Nia. She hadn't wandered off. She wasn't hiding behind a booth or sitting on a bench. There was nothing. No scream, no dropped shoe, no torn strap from her backpack. It was as if she had vanished from the earth. Michelle, now seated on a bench, rocked back and forth, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. An officer crouched beside her, asking questions, trying to piece together a timeline. Her answers were shaky. "I just turned around," she said. "I told her to wait in line. I went to get a soda." That was the first version. 20 minutes later, another officer pressed her for details. Michelle paused, her eyes darted. "I think I saw someone watching us earlier," she said, "near the corn dog stand. A man I didn't think anything of. At the time." The officer noted the shift. Michelle couldn't describe the man. She couldn't remember what shirt he was wearing. She wasn't sure if he had facial hair. Back at the command center, officers combed through security camera footage. From vendor booths and traffic cams nearby, nothing showed a man approaching Nia. Nothing showed Nia leaving. And then Tobias arrived. He was out of breath, his shirt half-buttoned, dust on his boots like he'd driven straight from a job site. The moment he saw the flashing lights, he knew something was wrong. When he reached Michelle, her face said it all. He asked where Nia was. She didn't answer right away, just stared past him. The officer beside them explained the situation. Tobias's hands curled into fists. "She wouldn't just run off," he said. "She's not like that. If she didn't see her mom, she would have stayed. She knows better." Michelle looked up at him then. "I swear, Tobias, I only turned around for a second." But something in his gut told him this wasn't right. No forced entry, no ransom note, no signs of a struggle. Just a child who was there, and then WASN single quotes. In the days following Nia's disappearance, the community expected to see a mother unravel. Cameras pointed at Michelle during vigils, interviews, and press updates. But what they saw was different. She spoke in short sentences, rarely cried, and often seemed detached, as if reading from a script. While others clutched photos of Nia and wept during church services, Michelle sat still, her face unreadable, her voice flat. At first, people chalked it up to shock. Grief shows itself in different ways. But as time passed, the sympathy started to fade. Her silence felt heavy, not hollow. Her lack of emotion began to look like something else entirely. Michelle stopped, answering Tobias's calls. He wanted updates, to help with the search, to stay involved. But she kept her distance, told him to speak through lawyers, claimed she needed space to process. Then, slowly, Adams Hill started appearing again. First, it was late-night visits. Then he began showing up at Michelle's apartment during the day. Eventually, he was seen coming and going more frequently, carrying groceries, walking her trash to the curb, even picking up her mail. People noticed, and they talked. Whispers spread. How could a mother who just lost her child move on this quickly? Why would she reconnect with the same man whose involvement ended her marriage so soon after her daughter vanished? The questions reached the police. Both Michelle and Adams were brought in separately for questioning. Detectives hoped the pressure would shake something loose, but both of them stuck to the same lines. Michelle insisting she'd simply turned around and lost sight of Nia, Adams claiming he had nothing to do with it. No one cracked. There was no surveillance showing Adams at the carnival, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, and without a body, there was no proof that a crime had even occurred. By October 2015, the case stalled. Evidence ran dry. Leads led nowhere. Media attention faded. The investigation was officially marked as inactive, but Tobias wasn't done. While the department packed up files and moved to other cases, Tobias launched his own search. He dipped into his savings, cashed out a portion of his business, and hired to private investigators former law enforcement men who knew how to work outside of the spotlight. They interviewed vendors, traced phone records, checked vehicle, GPS data, and followed Adams's movements in the days before and after the carnival. But still, nothing solid. Meanwhile, Michelle started over. She changed her number, disconnected from mutual friends, removed herself from every online post or group that still talked about Naya. She stopped attending church. Altogether, by early 2016, Adams had moved into her apartment. No wedding, no announcement, just a quiet transition, like nothing had ever happened. Neighbors saw them laughing on the porch, grocery shopping, driving out of town for weekends. Michelle was no longer the grieving mother. She was someone else entirely. Tobias, on the other hand, never stopped. And he never believed the lies. He knew his daughter. He knew her habits. He knew she wouldn't run. And he knew the woman he once loved was hiding something. Something he was determined to uncover, no matter how long it took. May 14th, 2021. A morning that should have been like any other. A construction crew was working deep in the marshlands on the edge of Edison, New Jersey. The air was thick, the ground heavy from days of rain. Bulldozers and excavators cut through the soaked land, pushing aside broken tree limbs and years of forgotten debris. It was supposed to be routine work, clearing ground to lay foundations for a new business park. Nothing unusual, nothing worth. Remembering Dot until the machine hit something it shouldn't have, the foreman ordered everything to stop. One of the workers jumped down to take a closer look. There, tangled in the roots of a fallen tree, coated in layers of mud and thyme, was a small pink backpack. Torn at the edges, faded in color. It didn't look like much at first, just another piece of trash buried by time. But when the worker reached down and picked it up, the weight of it told him it was something else, something important, something that didn't belong there. Inside the backpack, they found what no one was ready to face. A child's diary, pages glued together with water and dirt, but still readable in places. A small silver locket, rusted, but still holding a photo of Tobias Brown, smiling, cradling a newborn baby. The address he sent led to a short-term rental tucked between two aging apartment buildings. As she pulled into the narrow driveway and cut the engine, she sat for a moment in the dark, breathing in deep, gathering herself. She reached for her purse, checking the recorder one more time, feeling the small weight of it in her palm like a tether to something real. And then she stepped out of the car. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she kept going. She knocked once, then twice. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the low buzz of a television. Somewhere nearby, and the smell of something faintly sweet drifting from under the door. Then the door creaked open, slow, deliberate, like whoever was inside had been standing just on the other side, waiting. Serena held her breath, waiting for the man she had built in her mind, the businessman, the rescuer, to step forward. But what she saw instead made the blood drain from her face, made the air stick in her lungs, made her knees almost give way beneath her. Dot. Because standing there, framed in the doorway, were not the broad shoulders and polished smile of a stranger. It was Javian, and behind him, Kale. Their faces weren't angry, they weren't scared, they were calm, like this had always been the plan. Serena's purse slid from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a dull thud, the recorder inside still running, still capturing every heartbeat, every silent scream trapped in her chest. And she stared at her. Sons the boys she had carried, fed, loved, protected with a horror that no mother is ever prepared to feel. The kind that tears something loose inside you that can never be repaired. She stared at them, wide-eyed heart slamming against her. Ribs, 1,000 questions flooding her mind, but none of them making it to her mouth. When she finally found her voice, it cracked in a way that didn't sound like her anymore. Raw, desperate, and hollow. "Tell me this isn't you," she said. Almost whispered, almost begged. Javian lifted his hood just enough to meet her eyes. His face calm, not angry, not ashamed, just exhausted. Like this was something they had already made peace with a long time ago. "We had to, Mum," he said. "We had to keep up the life you made us used to." And behind him, Cale nodded, adding, "You taught us to want more, and then you took it away." Serena shook her head, stepping back, chest heaving, trying to find the edges of this nightmare. But the way they looked at her, the absence of regret in their eyes, told her there wasn't a way out. She reached for her phone with a speed she didn't know she still had, her fingers brushing the screen, just enough to open it, just enough to almost call for help. But Cale moved faster, grabbing her wrist with a force that made her gasp, twisting it just enough to make her drop the phone, sending it skittering across the floor, out of reach. And before she could scream, before she could pull free, Javian stepped forward, covering her mouth with one hand, pressing hard, his other hand pinning her shoulders back as Cale moved behind her. Both of them working in a sick, practiced rhythm that made it clear this moment wasn't a mistake, wasn't an accident, wasn't something they were regretting even as it was happening. Serena fought harder than she ever thought she could. Kicked and twisted and tried to bite down, tried to break free, tried to reach the door or the phone or anything that could save her. But their grip tightened. Javian continued strangling her, his palm careful, covering her mouth to prevent her from shouting. Cale brought out a kitchen knife and kept stabbing her in the stomach when he noticed she was being too hard to take. Down. The jazz music kept playing. The candles kept flickering. And somewhere outside, just a few feet away, the world kept turning. Unaware that inside this little rental house, a mother was losing everything she had ever built, ever loved, ever sacrificed for, one breath at a time. She was strangled to death at exactly 9:42 p.m. Almost 3 hours after Serena had first stepped into the Airbnb. The property host, a man named Calvin Reed, checked a Ring camera notification on his phone. He saw movement near the front porch. At first, he didn't think much of it. But when he zoomed in and caught sight of something dark staining the edge of the porch stairs, something that didn't look like wine or rain, he hesitated for just a second before tapping the emergency call button. When LAPD officers arrived minutes later, they found the front door pushed open slightly. The smell of candles still lingered. The soft echo of jazz music still played from somewhere deeper inside. And when they stepped in, weapons drawn, they moved carefully through the small, living space until they saw her. Serena Williams, lying motionless on the floor. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible theft. The officers knew they were looking at something different, something deliberate. Whoever had done this had taken their time, had walked out. The front door without panic, without urgency, and the boys, Javian and Cale, were nowhere in sight. They were gone as crime scene techs began to document the house. A female officer picked up Serena's purse from the floor and heard something faint, something mechanical, still humming. When they unzipped the lining, they found the small, hidden recording device still powered on, its red light blinking steadily like a heartbeat that refused to quit. It took less than an hour for forensic techs to pull the file, to hear the muffled sounds of the confrontation, the shuffling, the heavy breathing, and then the voices, clearer than anyone could have hoped for. Javian's voice, sharp and certain. This wasn't a case of self-defense or an accident. It was premeditated, planned, executed by hands that should have never been raised. Against her, the investigation moved quickly after that. Detectives obtained subpoenas to pull digital records, starting with the Instagram handle at Mr_Blaze. It didn't take long for cyber units to trace the IP address used to create the account back to Serena's own Wi-Fi, logged in multiple times from devices registered under her son's names. The discovery didn't just confirm suspicion. It blew the case wide open. There was no Blaze. There never had been. It was Javian and Cale all along. By Sunday morning, surveillance footage from a gas station 2 blocks away showed both boys on camera at 9:13 p.m., Javian wearing the same hoodie he had on in the Airbnb footage. Cale holding Serena's phone, both of them calm, no panic, no signs of remorse. Just 2 boys walking into the darkness like nothing had happened. With evidence stacking higher by the hour, arrest warrants were issued by Monday afternoon, full. Charges were filed under their legal names. And for the first time, the pieces of what had happened to Serena Williams were beginning to make a horrifying kind of sense. But for the officers assigned to bring them in, and for the family members waiting for answers they never wanted to hear, the hardest part wasn't the how, it was the why. And that answer, the real, full truth, was still waiting to be uncovered. March 2024 arrived heavy and grey. When Javian and Cale were escorted into the courtroom for the first time, wearing ill-fitting suits and chains at their wrists, there was a silence so sharp inside the gallery that even the sound of the judge flipping through papers seemed loud, because it wasn't just a trial people had come to witness. It was the dismantling of an illusion. The final, brutal unraveling of a story that had begun with so much love and ended with so much devastation. Both boys were charged as adults: first-degree murder, identity theft, financial fraud, and though their public defenders tried to argue that they had acted under mental instability, that they had suffered emotional neglect, it was clear from the beginning that the courtroom was not buying it, because the evidence didn't speak of impulsive rage or misunderstood cries for help. It spoke of planning, of cold decisions, of months spent weaving a lie so cruel it couldn't be excused. When the prosecution took the floor, they didn't just tell the jury what happened. They showed it, piece by piece. They pulled up the bank records that tracked Serena's savings draining away. They displayed the direct messages where Javian and Cale had crafted the fake Blaze persona, sending voice notes stolen from online strangers to keep up the illusion. They read aloud the captions from the hidden Instagram accounts that mocked her behind her back. And finally, they played the audio from the recorder found in Serena's purse. The cold, undeniable voices of her sons spelling out the last moments of her life. Their words, so casual, so empty of remorse, that more than one juror had to wipe tears from their eyes. The school counselor, Ms. Latrice Bell, took the stand, her voice shaking only once as she described the warnings she had given, the signs she had seen, the conversations she had tried to start before it was too late. As the evidence built, as the story of Serena's final months became clearer and heavier, there was no one left in that courtroom who could pretend this was about a mother who hadn't cared enough. This was about 2 boys who had wanted more, who had been taught how to reach, but had never been taught how to lose. And when they realized the life they felt entitled to was slipping away, they didn't ask for help. They didn't find another way. They destroyed the one person who had built it for them from nothing. It took the jury less than 3 hours to deliberate. 3 hours to sift through months of lies, a mother's entire life story, and the hollow defense that love should have been enough to excuse betrayal. When they returned, the courtroom fell into that same terrible silence as the clerk read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Cale sat there a little longer, jaw clenched, eyes darting like he wanted to say something, but couldn't decide if it was worth it. By nightfall, the tension in the house had settled into every wall, every hallway, every quiet moment, like a weight no one knew how to lift. That afternoon, Serena heard a loud crash from upstairs. Cale had thrown his PS5 against the closet door, shattering it into pieces. And when she opened his door to ask what was going on, he just stared at her and said, "It's nothing." Then he turned his back and pulled the blanket over his head, leaving her standing there, wondering if this was just teenage emotion or something deeper taking shape in a space she could no longer reach. By that night, the house felt colder, not in temperature but in spirit, like something unspoken had moved in with them. And as Serena sat in her room, scrolling through emails she couldn't focus on, she heard muffled voices through the vent. Javian and Kale, whispering just low enough that the words didn't carry clearly. Just tones, rhythms, fragments of phrases. Too soft to understand, but too deliberate to ignore. In the darkness of their room, lit only by the soft glow of a phone screen, Kale leaned in and said under his breath, "She really don't know who she raising." And Javian, quiet but steady, nodded without saying much. The silence between them was louder than anything they could have spoken. Both boys were locked in thought, their faces calm, their hands still. The tension in their bodies was not explosive, but focused. And whatever started forming in that moment wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, it was quiet. It was rooted in something far more dangerous than anger, because they weren't just mad about the money. They felt exposed, they felt challenged. And deep down, even if they couldn't say it out loud, they had started to believe that the woman in the room down the hall, the one who worked late and gave early, the one who made sacrifices without asking for recognition, had become an obstacle, not a provider, not a mother, in the way they once understood her, but someone who stood in the way of what they thought they deserved. And instead of pushing back, instead of confronting her directly, they started thinking in steps, in strategy, in silence, and the part Serena couldn't see, the part that kept her in the dark, was that while she thought she was setting boundaries, teaching values, showing tough love, her sons weren't just reacting, they were recalculating, reassessing, adjusting their view of her, not as someone to be feared or honored, but as someone to be outplayed, as a problem to solve, as the final barrier between them and a version of life they believed was still theirs for the taking. For the next few days, it looked from the outside like things were getting better. Javian started coming downstairs again, fixing himself cereal without slamming cabinets, nodding when Serena asked if he needed anything. Kale, who had barely made eye contact, started offering quick, one-word answers. If you didn't know any better, you might have thought the worst had passed, that the anger had cooled. Serena, exhausted, wanted to believe it too. It was easier to take the peace they were offering at face value than to question what it really meant. They ate dinner with her, not at the table, but at least in the same room, plates resting on their laps as they scrolled through their phones. And even though the conversation was thin and the smiles didn't reach their eyes, Serena clung to it, convincing herself that maybe this was just another hard phase, never knowing that underneath the surface, her sons were playing a different game entirely. Javian and Kale were not healing, they were plotting, learning how to say just enough to lower her guard, smiling just wide enough to stop her from asking too many questions, moving through the house like nothing had changed, when in reality everything had and in their minds the decision had already been made. The plan was already set in motion. It started on December 6th, 2023. Serena was sitting cross-legged on her bed when a new DM popped up on her Instagram. It was from a man named Mr. Blazetrue, whose profile looked polished and professional. Pictures of business trips, conference rooms, luxury watches, and soft, well-lit selfies. He claimed to be a 47-year-old entrepreneur from Chicago who traveled often, talked about business success, soulmates, and second chances. He was handsome, but not the kind of handsome that made you suspicious right away. He wore glasses. In some photos, casual sweaters in others, and in every conversation, he made Serena feel like she wasn't just another face in a crowd, but a woman being seen for who she was. Not as a mother, not as a worker, but as someone worth waiting for, worth talking to, worth building with. Every night, As the boys locked themselves away, she would pull out her phone, and there he would be, Blaze, sending good morning messages before sunrise, sending voice notes full of slow, deliberate laughter that made her close her eyes and smile, sending poetry she hadn't realized she still wanted to hear, calling her queen in a way that didn't sound rehearsed. For the first time in years, Serena allowed herself to believe in something she hadn't trusted for a long time. Not because Blaze was perfect, but because he felt easy, familiar, like a story she already knew the ending to. Weeks later, just after New Year's, the first favor came, slipping into their conversations almost casually. He said he had been traveling back from New York, that TSA had held his bag, his wallet was missing, and he was stranded for the night. It was embarrassing to ask, but he trusted her, knew she was different. He just needed $400 to check into a hotel. Without thinking twice, Serena sent the money over Zelle in under 3 minutes, telling herself that's what trust looked like when it mattered. It didn't stop there. A few days later came another request, $900 this time, for a short-term investment opportunity he swore would double in weeks. And though Serena hesitated for a breath, the way he talked about building a future together, about laying foundations, made it feel like not just a transaction, but a step toward the life she deserved. So she sent that to Dot. By February, the asks had grown larger, more confident, sometimes tied to business deals, sometimes to emergencies, once even framed as him wanting to surprise her with a ticket to Miami. And each time, Serena dipped deeper into her savings, telling herself that she could always make it back. That money was replaceable, but moments like this, feeling loved, feeling chosen, those didn't come around twice. By March, Blaze no longer had to explain. A simple, "Can you send it, baby?" was enough by the time she finally stopped to check the damage. The emergency fund she had spent almost a decade quietly building for the boys' college tuition, for her first home, for a future she hadn't even allowed herself to picture, clearly was gone. $70,000, gone. Not in one big transaction, not in a robbery or a break-in, but piece by piece, story by story, promise by promise, in small, almost invisible withdrawals that didn't just take her money, but chipped away at the belief that she had any control left at all. And yet, even as her account balance sank lower, Serena still clung to hope. She still told herself that Blaze was real, that people didn't just fake this kind of connection, that after everything she had survived, she couldn't be wrong about this, too. Because if he wasn't who he said he was, then what did that say about the world she had tried so hard to believe in? She didn't want to be foolish. She didn't want to be desperate. But more than anything, she didn't want to be alone again. And that's why, when Blaze's messages began to thin out, when his responses grew shorter, when the nightly phone calls stopped altogether, Serena didn't confront him right away. She made excuses for him, blamed time zones, the stress of business, anything to avoid facing the small gnawing truth taking shape in the back of her mind, until the day came when even she couldn't deny it anymore. Until the night she sat staring at her empty bank app, heart pounding, hands trembling, and realized she might have been holding on to a ghost. She had waited for long months for a chance to put a face to the name, to the voice that had become a part of her daily routine. And when she finally typed out the words, "I think you're lying to me," she stared at the screen for a long time before hitting send, her heart thudding against her ribs. When his reply came back just minutes later, smooth, easy, without a flicker of hesitation, "If you think I'm fake, let's meet." Friday, 7 p.m., Englewood. There was a part of her that exhaled, and another part that braced for something she couldn't name yet, but could feel gathering in the space around her. She agreed, of course. She needed answers more than she needed. The illusion of peace. On the night of the meeting, she took extra time getting ready, choosing a soft black dress she hadn't worn in months, spraying her favorite perfume along her wrists and neck. The scent wrapped around her like armor, a reminder that she was still here, still standing. Before she left, she tucked a small recording device into the lining of her purse, a gift from a client years ago. Something she had forgotten she even owned until that morning when the doubt finally screamed loud enough to be heard. The drive to Englewood was quiet, her heart hammering against the soft hum of the tires. She gripped the steering wheel tighter at every red light, rehearsing in her mind what she would say, how she would keep her voice steady, how she would demand her money back, how she would walk away with her head high, no matter what she found waiting for her. Birthdays were never skipped. She taught them how to use debit cards before they hit middle school. Their fridge was always full, their clothes folded and pressed. Everything Serena did pointed back to them. By 2020, she was finally making six figures. The apartment had turned into a 2-story rental in Baldwin Hills, with a backyard big enough to host cookouts. She bought her first car in her own name, without a cosigner. Javian and Cale were now teenagers, taller than her, deep-voiced, and full of attitude. She laughed when they tried to sound grown. She told friends they were good kids, a little spoiled maybe, but respectful. She believed it. She wanted to believe it. But underneath the structure, beneath the daily routines, was something she couldn't see. A feeling she ignored, like something was shifting, but too slowly to catch. She was exhausted, but she told herself it was worth it. Every sacrifice felt justified. She'd chosen this life, and in her eyes, she was winning. She couldn't see what was happening in the background. She had no reason to check their phones, no reason to question how much cash they had, no reason to wonder why they no longer came to the dinner table when she called, because she believed, deeply, that love, if poured in hard enough, could not fail. But love alone doesn't tell you when the floor is about to fall out from under you. By the fall of 2023, Javian and Cale turned 15. For Serena, it was a bittersweet shift, the kind of change every parent hopes for and dreads at the same time. They weren't little boys anymore. They had opinions, schedules, moods, secrets. That fall, Serena made a decision she believed would strengthen their bond. She started giving them each $3,000 a week as their allowance, cash, every Saturday morning. She called it financial freedom, a mother's way of saying, I trust you. I see you becoming men. Javian used this to build an image. He collected Jordans, wore them once, then stacked the boxes like trophies. He bought designer shirts in colors Serena had never seen before. He spent hours in the mirror, brushing his waves, posing for pictures, timing when to post so he'd get the most likes. Cale handled things differently, quieter, more methodical. He didn't show off. He didn't care about shoes or selfies. He spent his money learning how to trade crypto, watching hours of tutorials on YouTube, studying charts. He talked about NFTs like they were currency, and bragged about flipping Ethereum in class. Together they moved like a unit, one loud, one calculating, always in sync, always in control. Their bedroom became a showroom, rows of high-top sneakers, LED lights outlining the ceiling, a gaming setup with 2 monitors, one for school, one for everything else. The house itself was modest, but that room, it looked like it belonged in a music video. Serena saw the lifestyle growing around them and chalked it up to confidence, style, maybe even ambition. She smiled when they showed her the shoes, laughed when they joked about their classmates still wearing last year's brands. She didn't ask questions about how fast the money disappeared. She didn't tell them to slow down. She just kept handing it over, thinking, they're good boys. They deserve it. She believed that spoiling them wasn't spoiling them. It was healing something. Making up for what their father never gave. Making up for what she couldn't always be. She wanted them to walk into rooms with pride. She wanted them to never feel small. If $3,000 a week gave them that, then so be it. But while Serena was pouring love, in the only way she knew how, something else was taking shape beneath the surface. A shift that didn't feel sharp or sudden. It crept in slowly, through late-night door slams, vague answers, phone calls that ended when she entered the room. The house still looked the same. Dinner was still on the stove. The walls were still clean. But her boys, something about them had changed. She just hadn't been told yet. Not by them, not by anyone in the house. It would take a call from someone outside. Someone who'd been watching from a distance, to finally make Serena look closer. It was on a Friday, December 1st, 2023, just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when Serena's personal phone rang in the middle of her workday. A number she didn't recognize flashed across the screen while she was buried in client files, running on a half-eaten granola bar. And something about the timing, or maybe just the stillness in the air around her, made her pause long enough to swipe and answer, only to hear the measured voice of Ms. Latrice Bell, the school counselor at Washington Charter High, who didn't waste time on small talk. She got right to the point, calmly yet firmly explaining that there had been concerns about her sons, Javian and Cale, specifically that they had been handing out $100 bills at school, flaunting luxury items during class, throwing unsanctioned off-campus parties with strip club themes, and had recently been caught with vape pens and more money than any 15-year-old should ever be carrying in a backpack. Serena's grip tightened around her pen as she listened, her brain struggling to make the words match the boys she kissed goodbye every morning, the ones who had grown up sleeping 3 feet from her bed when rent was late and space was tight. And while Ms. Bell kept speaking, her tone careful but direct, Serena heard only fragments now. Social media, dangerous influence, administration becoming concerned, other parents starting to call, all swirling together into a pressure behind her eyes that made it hard to blink, let alone breathe. By the time she ended the call and placed the phone back on her desk, her world hadn't exploded. Not yet, but a quiet kind of storm had started to press against her chest. And the only thing louder than the silence in her office was the pounding of her heart, asking the same question over and over. What have they been doing behind my back? She made it through the rest of the workday without letting anyone see that something was wrong. Nodded in meetings, typed reports, smiled at her team on the way out of the building, like her world wasn't tilting. But the moment she got home, after dinner had been cooked, the dishes rinsed, and both boys had retreated behind their locked doors with their usual, "I'm good, Ma," she sat on the edge of her bed, opened her laptop, and typed in the usernames she hadn't seen before, but had been quietly passed along by Ms. Bell during the call, at JM Oni for real, and at Cale the Don.2. Names that didn't sound like her sons, but belonged to them nonetheless. She looked at their Instagram, profiles the ones she never knew about, and what loaded on the screen didn't just take her by surprise. It took the air out of her lungs. Post after post, showing her sons throwing money like it had no value, making slow-mo videos in hotel rooms under red lighting, flashing expensive watches, and pouring out liquor she had never once seen in their home, all while surrounded by teenage girls dressed for something no high school should ever have allowed. Their captions were smug and loud, filled with hashtags like hashtag money, AINT at Inc., hashtag mom.no, and hashtag too rich for rules. And in one post that froze her hand over the trackpad, Javian stood in the middle of the school parking lot, throwing bills in the air while Cale counted stacks behind him, laughing like he'd just won a game Serena didn't even know they were playing. She kept scrolling, each swipe heavier than the last, watching her sons live a version of themselves she had never seen before one. Full of pride, of ego, of something almost cruel, and how carefree they looked. While she worked 60-hour weeks just to make sure they had clean sheets and meals that never ran out. And the deeper she went into the images, the more the house she thought she'd built seemed like it had been made of glass. Because these weren't just boys having fun. These were boys who had learned to lie with their smiles, to live double lives in the same home, where she once rocked them to sleep and promised them the world. When she finally closed the laptop, her hands stayed still on the keyboard for a long time, her eyes burning not just from the screen, but from the realization that what Ms. Bell had told her wasn't even the story, it was just the surface, and what lay beneath it was a kind of disappointment that didn't come with shouting or slamming doors, but with silence, a kind of hurt that settled low in her stomach and wouldn't move. And as the tears finally came, quiet and bitter, sliding down her face one at a time, she didn't say anything out loud, not because there was nothing to say, but because the kind of pain she felt didn't need words to be understood. It was the kind you feel when everything you've built, everything you've worked for, everything you thought was solid, suddenly shifts beneath you, and for the first time in years, Serena wasn't sure if she still knew who her sons really were. It was early Saturday morning. The sun was barely up, the sky still carrying that grey-blue colour that sits between night and day. Serena stood in the kitchen with her arms folded tight against her chest. Both boys were seated across from her at the table, Javian with his hoodie pulled low over his forehead, Cale scrolling quietly on his phone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw threats. She didn't preach. She just looked at them, calm and firm, and said, "Your allowance is now $200. That's it. You want more? Earn it." And for a moment, there was no response, no reaction, just a long stretch of silence that made the air feel heavy in the room. Javian blinked slowly, lifted his head, looked her straight in the eye, but didn't say a word. Then he stood up, without pushing in his chair, walked out of the kitchen, and didn't speak again for 2 full days. Not a word, not even a glance in her direction. Maya, who had been forced to confront the dual realities of her husband's public triumphs and private failings, redirected her energy toward raising her children, Ethan and Sophia Summers, with renewed strength, drawing on her own childhood lessons of perseverance. Maya embraced therapeutic guidance and community support networks that helped her find meaning in the wreckage of a broken marriage. Though the pain of knowing that the man she loved had a life of duplicity would linger, she soon discovered that forgiveness could serve as a foundation for a transformed household. In a remarkable act of reconciliation, Maya eventually opened her heart to extend empathy toward Jessica Rivera, bridging the gap between 2 families once divided by tragedy. Jessica's path, too, became a saga of renewal. In the immediate wake of her life-altering diagnosis, she was overwhelmed by sorrow and isolation. However, the compassionate care and advanced treatments provided by a dedicated medical team soon stabilized her condition. With the support of close family members, especially her devoted cousin, Carmen Rios, Jessica learned to manage her illness, ensuring that the life growing within her would be given every chance to flourish. 9 months after that fateful ambush, she gave birth to a healthy son, Jose Summers, whose existence became a beacon of hope for all who knew the story. Medical reports confirmed that young Jose was free of HIV, a fact that symbolized a victory of modern medicine and human resilience. Refusing to allow her past to define her destiny, Jessica sought to reclaim her future. Enrolling full-time at a prestigious university, she pursued a degree in social work, a field that resonated deeply with her desire to advocate for others who had suffered silently. Balancing the rigorous demands of academia with the responsibilities of new motherhood, Jessica transformed her hardships into an inspirational force. Throughout these challenging years, her cousin Carmen ensured that baby Jose was lovingly cared for, enabling Jessica to focus on her studies and eventually graduate with top honors. Her academic success shone as proof that even the most painful beginnings could be rewritten into narratives of triumph. As time passed, the evolving bond between Maya's family and Jessica's household grew steadily stronger. What once began as the hurt of betrayal gradually evolved into a shared commitment to healing and community reform. Maya's children, Ethan and Sophia, came to view young Jose as an extension of their own family, a symbol of how, despite all pain, new beginnings could emerge. Through regular family gatherings, joint community events, and public outreach projects, the once fractured families united behind a common goal: to honor the memory of Derek Summers by fostering a legacy of integrity that would safeguard future generations against deception. Across Miami, the remembrance of this turbulent chapter spurred far-reaching changes. Miami Norland Senior High School instituted unprecedented reforms that addressed not only the oversight of its coaches and administrators, but also the mentoring practices that shaped young lives. Driven by the tragic lessons of recent events, teachers, parents, and civic leaders joined forces to ensure that the dark chapters of the past were not repeated. The transformation was felt in every classroom and echoed throughout the corridors of local governance, a commitment to rebuild trust on a foundation of transparency, support, and mutual respect. As we close this harrowing chapter, the legacy of Coach Derek Summers' hidden life and its catastrophic end offers numerous lessons. Each segment of this tale, from a public image marred by private failings to the relentless quest for reparation, serves to remind us that while human frailties are inevitable, so too is the pursuit of truth. The intricate web of betrayal has forever changed lives, yet it has also ignited a collective resolve to ensure that the mistakes of the past steer us toward a better, more compassionate future. Jessica Rivera's transformation is emblematic of that resolve. From the devastating shock of an HIV diagnosis and the overwhelming responsibility of unplanned motherhood, she emerged as an advocate and scholar who used her personal trials as the catalyst for a new beginning. Her choice to study social work, coupled with the unwavering support from her family and the nurturing guidance of cousins like Carmen Rios, transformed her pain into a mission to help others reclaim their lives from the clutches of injustice. Today, Jessica stands not only as a survivor, but also as an inspiring beacon for countless individuals grappling with adversity. Maya Arnett, though scarred by the duplicity of the man she once adored, found that her strength lay in the future. She built for her children, Ethan and Sophia Summers. In rising above the darkness of past betrayals, she discovered that healing is a journey best traveled in unity. By forging a new familial bond with Jessica, and by embracing the fragile hope embodied in baby Jose Summers, Maya has redefined the meaning of forgiveness. Her determination to foster an environment where transparency and accountability reign has not only mended the fractures within her household, but has inspired broader reforms within the community. Detective Marco Alvarez's painstaking investigation, supported by the diligent efforts of Officer Linda Ray and Dr. Helen Kwan, exemplified the power of steadfast commitment. Their work illuminated the dark corners where deceit had festered, ultimately leading to a resounding verdict that demonstrated society's unwavering demand for justice. The harsh sentence as capital punishment for Rafael Cortez, life imprisonment; for Marlon Diaz and Luis Gutierrez, and a lengthy term for Victor Delgado, stand as a stark reminder that every transgression, no matter how deeply hidden, will one day be brought to light. The communities that once marveled at the triumphs of Miami Norland Senior High School now rally behind new values, those which prioritize ethical leadership, real accountability, and the protection of the most Vulnerable, the tragic demise of Coach Derek Summers, a story etched into Miami's collective memory, has become a catalyst for institutional change and personal redemption. As families come together, bridging the gap between once divided lives, they present a future where the lessons of the past are honored not with bitterness, but with a renewed commitment to justice and unity. In each whispered conversation, each shared tear, and every act of reformation sparked by this turbulent tale, there is an enduring promise that the pursuit of truth, however costly, will ultimately illuminate the darkest corners of our society. The intertwined destinies of Jessica, Maya, their children, and the entire community remind us that even in the wake of devastating loss, hope can flourish once more. Let this story not only serve as a chronicle of betrayal and its consequences, but also as a triumphant testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Story 3, she raised them on her own. Gave up sleep, gave up comfort, gave up everything, just to make sure they had more than she ever did. She worked herself into exhaustion so they'd never have to feel the kind of hunger she grew up with. And when she finally said no, when she decided it was time they learned the value of what they were given, she never expected the silence that followed. She never questioned the quiet stares, the locked doors, the late-night whispers, and by the time she started noticing things that didn't make sense, the woman who spent her life giving everything to the people she loved most walked straight into something she never saw coming, something planned, something cruel, something that left police standing over her body in a room, and a question that still haunts every person who knew her. How did it come to this? Serena Antoinette Williams was 42 years old, a woman who lived with intention. Her life didn't bend toward chance. It followed a plan. She was born in Baton Rouge, raised by a mother who worked in a hospital kitchen and a father who disappeared before she turned 7. By the time she was 16, Serena had already made up her mind that survival wouldn't be enough. She wanted more. She left Louisiana at 26 with a borrowed suitcase and a tax refund check. By 30, she was settled in Los Angeles with a master's degree. In finance, a small apartment, and a new marriage she believed would finally bring her peace. But peace didn't last. In 2009, she gave birth to twin boys, Javian and Kale. 2 pounds of fragile life in each arm. No instruction manual, no help, just her, and a silence that started the moment her husband, DeMarco Hughes, left the hospital with a suitcase and never came back. He didn't even send a message. By the time she learned he had moved in with his secretarial woman 10 years, younger and half as committed Serena had already accepted the reality that she would be doing. This alone, there were no child support checks, no weekend visits, no apologies, just diaper bags, rent notices, and long nights that blurred into one another. She waited tables by night and filed spreadsheets by day. Some weeks, she worked 70 hours just to stay ahead. She missed birthdays, cancelled dates, said no to family events, all so her boys could eat without question and sleep without worry. By 2017, Serena had clawed her way into a full-time role at one of the top financial firms downtown. It didn't come with sympathy. There was no leeway for being late, no understanding when she needed to leave early because one of the twins had a fever. But she stayed. She kept showing up. Every spreadsheet balanced, every deadline met, every promise kept. She didn't dress flashy, didn't chase luxury. But when tax season came around, the boys always had new shoes. In another corner of this intricate story, Maya Arnett, the devoted wife of Coach Derek Summers, began to notice the fragile seams in the tapestry of her once perfect marriage. Born into a family that valued honesty and tenacity, Maya had always believed in the sanctity of her union with Derek. Together, they once painted a picture of domestic bliss, shared smiles over family dinners, dreams exchanged in quiet moments, and the steady support that formed the backbone of their married life. With the arrival of their 2 children, Ethan and Sophia Summers, the warmth of her family home seemed inviolable, a sanctuary from the harsher realities of life. However, as subtle discrepancies began to emerge, text received late at night, an unexplained absence, a glance that lingered to long Maya's certainties, were slowly disrupted. The peace she had so carefully cultivated was undercut by an undercurrent of deceit that no amount of hopeful denial could silence. With the steady determination that had long defined her character, Maya started to piece together a mosaic of hints and half-truths. Every misplaced word, every hushed phone conversation, revealed fissures in her world that mounted until they could no longer be ignored. Maya's own childhood had been marked by the lessons of resilience in the face of hardship. Raised by a single parent who taught her that truth, however painful, was essential to survival. She resolved that no betrayal would ever define her future. With an unyielding determination, she began to discreetly archive evidence, the receipts for mysterious expenses, the fragments of overheard conversations, and the carefully hidden documents that finally painted a damning picture of Derek's double life. What emerged was an inexorable narrative of duplicity and concealed affairs that threatened not only her marriage, but the sense of stability her children so dearly depended upon. Maya's journey was as much about protecting her family as it was about reclaiming her own dignity. Every revelation forced her to confront the painful duality of a man who had once been a rock. Yet each step in uncovering the truth strengthened her resolve to rebuild a future that was free from the intrusion of betrayal. Rather than allowing bitter anger to overwhelm her, Maya channeled her grief into an unwavering commitment to ensure that the institution of trust within her family and beyond would never again be so easily subverted. Her determination to gather indisputable evidence not only set the stage for the broader investigation, but also laid the groundwork for the transformation that would soon emanate from the heart of her personal tragedy. On a storm-darkened night, when the heavens released torrents and fate converged with calculated intent, a pivotal moment arrived that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. In a cruel twist of fate, Coach Derek Summers was lured to a high-rise apartment under an elaborate pretext, a meeting that was meant to rejoin him with his secret lover, Jessica Rivera. Yet, on that fateful evening, the course of the future was dramatically rewritten. Tormented by her devastating diagnosis and terrified by the immense responsibility of impending motherhood, Jessica made a split-second decision to cancel the rendezvous. She raced instead to a nearby crisis center, seeking both refuge and the immediate care necessary to shelter her fragile state. Unaware of the sudden change, Derek arrived at the designated site alone. His hope and longing mingled with a quiet confidence born of routine clandestine meetings. It was in that lonely moment, as rain hammered relentlessly and thunder shook the night, that his fate was sealed. A meticulously orchestrated ambush unfolded under the cover of the storm, designed by the calculating hand of Victor Delgado. Once a close business associate of Derek's, turned bitter adversary, Delgado's life had been marred by feelings of betrayal and humiliation after a lucrative partnership crumbled. Determined to exact vengeance, Delgado assembled a team of professionals to ensure that his plan would not go awry. Among them was Rafael Cortez, an ex-military enforcer renowned for his clinical precision, Marlon Diaz, whose expertise in covert operations was unwavering, and Luis Gutierrez, a master of technical manipulation and evidence obliteration. As Derek waited in the deserted hallway of the apartment building, the relentless rain and howling wind set a grim cadence, in a heartbeat that would become etched in the annals of Miami's dark history. The silence was shattered by a single, decisive gunshot. The bullet, fired by Rafael, tore through the gloom and struck Derek with ruthless efficiency, ending a life that had balanced on the edge of public adoration and private error. In the ensuing chaos, Marlon and Luis moved systematically, erasing any trace that might later lead back to the conspirators. Within minutes, the space that had once echoed with life was filled only with the sound of falling rain and the quiet finality of a life extinguished that would forever link her fate to this tragic night. Jessica, drawn from the safety of the crisis center by a surge of anxious instinct, ventured briefly near a perimeter window of the apartment building. From that vantage, her wide eyes bore witness to the devastating outcome: a lone figure crumpling to the ground beneath a solitary gunshot. Overwhelmed by horror and sorrow, she immediately retreated back to the safety of her refuge, preserving her anonymity. Days later, a combination of surveillance footage and painstaking forensic evidence would confirm her non-involvement and protect her from wrongful accusations that threatened to taint her already fragile life. In the aftermath of that dismal, rain-drenched night, Miami's sense of security was overturned by questions and demands for justice. The celebrated halls of Miami Norland Senior High School were soon filled, not with the echo of cheers, but with murmurs of shock and sorrow, as the truth of Coach Summer's hidden duplicity began to surface. Amid this storm of public disbelief, Detective Marco Alvarez was summoned, a man whose reputation for meticulous and steadfast investigation had long been his calling card. Joined by the methodical officer Linda Ray and the astute forensic specialist, Dr. Helen Kwan, Alvarez embarked on an exhaustive pursuit that would leave no secret buried. Detective Alvarez was no stranger to the complexities of cases that cut deep into the fabric of community life. A native of Miami, Alvarez's early experiences in a rough neighborhood instilled in him a fervent belief in justice and the absolute necessity of uncovering every truth. Over the years, his work in the police department honed his ability to spot inconsistencies and to trace even the faintest digital footprint back to its source. With a calm and measured demeanor, he initiated an investigation that began with the seemingly isolated facts of one fateful ambush and soon revealed an extensive network of betrayal. Every shred of evidence, no matter how minute a cryptic text message, a financial transaction that defied explanation, the precise angle of a bullet's trajectory was carefully catalogued. Alvarez's team, screening hours of surveillance footage from the night in question, identified the unmistakable presence of Rafael Cortez as he moved through the building. Coupled with the digital trail that linked Marlon Diaz and Luis Gutierrez to the systematic eradication of evidence, a damning picture emerged. It became indisputable that the mastermind behind the calculated vendetta was Victor Delgado, a man whose life had been irreversibly marred by the collapse of a once valued partnership with Derek Summers. Victor Delgado's background was a tale of ambition turned bitter. Raised in an environment where success was the only measure of worth, Delgado had once risen to prominence alongside Derek. However, as business fortunes shifted and Derek made decisions that left Delgado sidelined and humiliated, the embers of resentment began to glow. Over time, that quiet anger coalesced into a vengeful plan, one that would force Derek's downfall by any means necessary. Delgado's orchestration of this elaborate plot, documented through encrypted emails and clandestine phone calls, confirmed his intent to exact retribution for a personal wound that had festered over years. With the mounting evidence, Alvarez and his team brought the case before a court of law. In a trial that drew a record crowd and intense media scrutiny, Alvarez presented a steadfast investigation, unwavering evidence, and the unchallenged testimony of key witnesses. The courtroom became a stage where the dark underbelly of loyalty, ambition, and betrayal was laid bare. The verdict was unequivocal. Rafael Cortez, whose single gunshot had sealed Derek's fate, was condemned to death. Marlon Diaz and Luis Gutierrez were sentenced to life without parole, and Victor Delgado, the orchestrator of this tragic series of events, was handed a lengthy prison term designed to permanently banish him from ever wielding power again. In the months and years that followed the trial, the reverberations of Coach Derek Summers' death rippled across the community and reshaped lives in profound ways. The once revered Miami Norland Senior High School underwent a transformation as school boards and community leaders implemented sweeping reforms. Ethically binding oversight committees were established, and protocols were redefined to forge an environment where honesty and accountability would be the new bedrocks of institutional heritage. For Maya Arnett, the journey toward healing was a slow but determined passage through grief and recovery. After the trial's conclusion, the heartbreak of betrayal was tempered by the resolve to rebuild a future free from deception. It burns from the first guest's arrival until the last light goes out. It burns for the love Iona gave so freely. It burns for the trust she placed in people she believed in. It burns for the lives she continues to change, even in her absence. That flame has never been allowed to die. Ayanna. Brooks believed in love. She lived with hope. In the end, she left the world a little brighter than she found it. And even in her silence, she still speaks. Ayanna Brooks gave everything she had to the people she loved. She trusted when she had every reason to be cautious. She believed when she could have doubted, and in the end, it cost her everything. But her voice is not lost. Her story is not over. It lives in every lesson she left behind. If you have ever been in a relationship and sensed something was wrong, if you have ever laid awake at night with a feeling you could not explain, if you have ever looked into the eyes of someone you love and felt a chill you tried to ignore, trust yourself. Speak up. Protect those you love. Share Ayanna's story. Because silence kills more dreams than bullets ever could. Story 2 tonight. A shattering secret unfolds. A truth hidden behind the golden veneer of respect and admiration that has long defined a community. Here begins the story of a man admired by all, whose double life concealed betrayal and unleashed a tide of consequences. His hidden passions, the vulnerable hearts caught in his web, and the relentless pursuit of justice combined to form a tale that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty and trust. Today's story is not only a journey through passion and deceit, but also a stark reminder that even our highest heroes are not immune to error, and the cost of those errors can be catastrophic. In the sun-drenched hallways and roaring stadiums of Miami Norland Senior High School, Coach Derek Summers shone as a beacon of achievement and discipline. Each game, each practice session, and every well-timed pep talk painted him as the quintessential mentor. Man who inspired not only athletic prowess, but also values of hard work and resilience. To the community, Derek was a role model. He participated in local charity events and was a familiar presence in every school function. His achievements on the field were celebrated with trophies, banners, and a sea of proud faces, all affirming a legacy built on success. But while the public celebrated his victories and his calm authority, a parallel existence was quietly taking root behind closed doors. When the stadium lights dimmed and the cheers faded into distant echoes, Derek stepped away from his well-rehearsed public image. In the privacy of empty corridors and dark parking lots, he indulged in choices that whispered of secret longings, life carefully divided into two contrasting halves. While his disciplined exterior won the admiration of many, his unsanctioned activities hinted at an internal conflict that would soon send shockwaves through the lives of others. Before he became the celebrated coach, Derek was raised in a modest household in the heart of Miami, born to parents who struggled but never lost sight of dignity. he found solace in sports, a refuge where hard work often translated into tangible success. As a young man, Derek played local football, his raw talent catching the eye of mentors who saw in him a potential far greater than his humble beginnings. Determined to rise above his circumstances, he embraced every opportunity, forging a path that seemed destined for greatness. His relentless work ethic and his genuine desire to help others achieve their own dreams eventually led him to the position he now held. Yet, as he ascended to celebrity status within the community, the weight of expectations began to clash with personal desires that remained hidden. Despite his polished public demeanor, there were chapters of loneliness and forbidden longing penned during his silent hours. Secret life that would later unravel the tapestry of his achievements. Derek's story is one of contrasts. A man who built an impeccable public image while quietly wrestling with impulses that defied the moral framework he preached. His duality was not known to those who cheered for him on humid Friday nights, and it is this very hidden life that forms the seed of the tragedy to come. Within the vibrant, high-spirited world of Miami Norland stood Jessica Rivera, a youthful star in her own right, as a seasoned cheerleader fresh-faced, with ambition and a yearning to make her mark. Jessica captivated audiences with her grace and natural charm. Yet, behind her effervescent smile lay layers of vulnerability. Raised in a close-knit family that prized talent and determination, Jessica's early years were a delicate balance of rigorous practice and heartfelt dreams. Her parents, having overcome personal hardships, imbued her with the belief that beauty and talent could surmount any challenge. However, the pressures of perfection soon left Jessica craving for genuine connection. For someone who would look past the exuberance of high school life into the depths of her unspoken fears, it was during one of the countless after-school sessions that fate began to weave its delicate, dangerous web. In the soft hum of a nearly empty gym, Jessica's eyes met those of Coach Derek Summers. At first, the exchange was fluting a polite nod, a shared smile in passing. But over time, what started as casual interactions evolved into private conversations that bridged the gap between authority and aspiration. They exchanged brief texts after practice, setting aside the formalities of their roles to reveal quiet confidences. In these hushed moments, Jessica found in Derek an unexpected source of attention that validated her insecurities. For Derek, the opportunity to be seen as more than just a mentor offered a brief escape from the isolating pressures of his divided life. Their connection, seeded in the mundane cadence of school routines, gradually grew into something that whispered promises of intimacy while remaining locked in secrecy. Derek, whose life had always been defined by rigorous public standards, experienced a respite in Jessica's earnest eyes, a momentary reprieve from the expectations that had so long weighed him down. For Jessica, whose family life had been tempered by cautious optimism and guarded hope, every whispered conversation with her coach filled an emotional void that no ordinary interaction could mend. Beneath every gentle exchange, the sense of inevitable consequence hovered a quiet reminder that the connections formed in secrecy often carry a heavier burden than the light they appear to emit. The affection shared between them was both dangerous and compelling, drawing each into a world where rules melted away beneath the intensity of private confessions. As their bond deepened, the lovers moved further into a realm where every stolen moment, every covert text, was an act of rebellion against the limitations of their respective worlds. This forbidden union, carefully nurtured away from the public eye, promised an escape from loneliness while silently preparing to exact its steepest toll. In life, every choice casts a long shadow, and for Jessica Rivera, that looming darkness came crashing in the form of a single, heart-wrenching diagnosis. What was meant to be a routine doctor's visit became a turning point that upended her world. The sterile corridors of a local clinic bore witness to the moment when Jessica learned that the intimate moments she had shared with Coach Summers had left an indelible mark on her body. She had contracted HIV. The news reverberated through her like a shockwave, shattering her dreams of an unburdened future and replacing them with a cloud of foreboding uncertainty. That devastating revelation was paired with another life-altering discovery, a positive pregnancy test that confirmed she was expecting a child, conceived in the depths of their forbidden liaison, within the confines of that cold examination room. Hope and fear collided fiercely. Jessica's vivid aspirations for a promising future were darkened by the stark reality of a condition that not only threatened her own life, but also placed the life growing inside her at risk. The burden was immense, a double-edged sword that forced her to confront the consequences of a single choice made in moments cloaked in secrecy. Born into a family that had always prized determination and resilience, Jessica had been taught to overcome adversity. Yet, neither her nurturing background nor the comforting words of parents could completely prepare her for the life that now lay before her. Life painted in shades of struggle and the daunting challenge of societal stigma. In the weeks that followed, every heartbeat reminded her of the irreversible cost of those hidden moments. The clinic's harsh lights, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the trembling voice of the doctor, all combined to engrave a memory that would haunt her for years to come. The weight of the diagnosis settled heavily upon her, transforming each day into a battle between despair and the desperate spark of hope that remained within. Far from being an isolated tragedy, Jessica's personal turmoil signaled the beginning of a cascade of repercussions that would soon rock the foundation of the community around her. It was not merely her future at stake. Every life intertwined in this clandestine affair was beginning to feel the pull of consequence. The facade that had once cloaked the intimacy between her and Derek was now cracking, threatening to expose the chain of events that would lead, invariably, to a bitter reckoning. While the corridors of Miami Norland continued to echo with cheers and applause, the haunting aftermath of that single visit to the doctor would soon demand its due. And with that call, the walls around Devon Hart and Chanel Rivers began to close in. The Atlanta Police Department didn't waste time. After the tip from the insurance office, investigators opened a full case file on the sudden death of Ayanna Brooks. By April 18, 2023, they were already pulling security footage from the Grand Marlowe Ballroom. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. Grainy but clear, the video showed Chanel Rivers standing behind the champagne tower during the final round of toasts. At first glance, it looked harmless, just a best friend fussing over wedding details. But when slowed down, the footage captured her switching to glasses. One placed carefully in front of Ayanna, the other slid toward Devon Hart. Less than 20 minutes later, Ayanna collapsed. The next piece of the puzzle came from Ayanna's cell phone records. Forensic analysis uncovered deleted text messages between Devon and Chanel on a burner phone. One message from Devon read, "We're set after this." Another from Chanel simply said, "Finally." It was enough to shift the investigation from suspicious to criminal. Detectives dug deeper, pulling GPS data from the burner phones. What they found painted an even clearer picture. 2 weeks before the wedding, Devon and Chanel made multiple trips to an industrial chemical supply warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta, a facility that catered mostly to commercial contractors. Neither of them had any legitimate reason to be there. Surveillance cameras from the warehouse confirmed it was them. Chanel in a baseball cap, Devon glancing nervously over his shoulder. They purchased an untraceable, highly toxic chemical compounder, substance lethal in even small doses, one that would leave almost no trace once metabolized. As the evidence stacked up, detectives also interviewed Ayanna's inner circle. Every story painted the same picture. Ayanna had been pure-hearted, selfless. She had spent her last weeks alive planning a future she believed would be shared with people who loved her. One friend broke down in tears, remembering how I had once paid an overdue electricity bill without being asked. The kindness Ayana showed freely made the betrayal by Devon and Chanel cut even deeper. They hadn't just stolen her life, they had stolen it from someone who would have given them everything if they had just asked. But as detectives pieced together the story, a chilling realization emerged. Ayana was never their final move, because inside Devon's apartment, buried under piles of discarded paperwork, police found another set of plans, a second phase, another target, and this time it wasn't about hiding guilt. It was about finishing what they had started. Death wasn't enough for them. They had one more life they intended to take. By April 20th, 2023, the investigation into the death of Ayana Brooks was a full-blown homicide case, and the two people at the center of it were nowhere to be found. When detectives arrived at Devon Hart's apartment early that morning with a warrant, they found an empty shell. Chanel Rivers' apartment told the same story. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The burner phones they once used to plot their betrayal had been smashed and tossed into dumpsters. Credit cards were frozen, bank accounts drained. They had planned their disappearance with the same cold calculation they used to plan Ayana's death. By April 22nd, their faces flooded news stations, plastered across wanted posters. Anonymous tips flooded in, but none of the leads held. They were ghosts. True crime forums erupted. TikTok users posted theories. A line had been drawn in the sand, and while America argued, the truth remained cold and unchanged. Somewhere out there, two people responsible for the death of a woman who trusted them with her life were still breathing free air, but freedom was running out. Every hour that passed brought them closer to a reckoning they could not escape. As the country searched for Devon Hart and Chanel Rivers, another name quietly moved to the center of it all: Kendall Brooks. The once distant sister Ayana had forgiven now found herself living a nightmare. On April 23, 2023, detectives showed up at Kendall's door with a warning. She was now a potential target. Handwritten notes recovered from Devon's abandoned apartment listed Kendall's full name, her new address, her workplace, even the routes she usually drove home. The plan wasn't just to silence Ayana. It was to erase anyone who stood between them and the money. Police placed Kendall under 24-hour protection. Unmarked vehicles followed her every move. She kept her lights off at night. She slept with a suitcase packed by the door. She stayed alive because she had no choice. Meanwhile, across state lines, Devon and Chanel kept moving. They paid cash for motels, they changed cars, they covered their faces. But no amount of running could erase the trail they left behind. On April 28, 2023, in a small, run-down motel off a rural highway in Lafayette, Louisiana, the hunt came to an end. Acting on a tip from a motel clerk who recognized their faces from the news, U.S. Marshals and local police moved in. Devon tried to run. Chanel locked herself in the bathroom. It didn't matter. Within minutes, it was over. Inside the motel room, police found a duffel bag filled with cash, prepaid cell phones, a handgun, a hunting knife, a GPS device loaded with Kendall's address and printed maps showing routes to Atlanta. Kendall wasn't a coincidence. She was a target. They were still coming for her. They were willing to kill again. Their greed didn't end at Ayana's grave. It demanded more blood. By the summer of 2024, the case against Devon Hart and Chanel Rivers was ready for trial. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, grieving family members, and curious strangers. On June 10th, opening arguments began inside the Fulton County Courthouse. The faces once seen smiling at Ayana Brooks' wedding now sat stone-faced at the defense table. When the trial opened, Chanel tried to save herself first. She broke down on the stand, sobbing, painting herself as a victim trapped under Devon's control. She claimed she never wanted to hurt Ayanna, that she was manipulated, threatened, used. For a moment, some in the courtroom were uncomfortable, but that moment did not last. The prosecution pulled out the messages, the receipts, the maps, the burner phone records. They showed Chanel sending laughing emojis and texts just days after Ayanna's death. They showed her scouting Kendall's neighborhood. They showed a woman who was not broken. They showed a woman making plans. When Devon took the stand, he showed no tears, no remorse. He blamed everyone but himself. He accused Ayanna of lying, of manipulating him, of using him. He looked directly at the jury and said he was the real victim. Every lie, every word, every excuse fell flat in the heavy silence of the courtroom. Witness after witness testified to Ayanna's kindness, her loyalty, her blind trust in the two people who orchestrated her death. Forensic experts walked the jury through the poison found in her system. Investigators detailed the cold steps Devon and Chanel took to cover their tracks. Friends recounted how Ayanna celebrated Chanel's birthday just weeks before the wedding, never knowing her best friend was plotting against her. In front of the world, they showed what they truly were, not victims. Predators. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the room held its breath. Devon Hart and Chanel Rivers were both found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and fraud. On July 2nd, 2024, the judge sentenced them each to 50 years in state prison, without the possibility of parole. Neither of them flinched when the sentences were read. Neither of them said a word. But for Ayanna's family, for her friends, for a city that still remembered the girl who believed in happy endings, it was the first real step toward justice. The guilty verdict was only the beginning. As news cameras rolled outside the courthouse, the country watched in real time. Was Chanel Rivers a puppet, or was she the true mastermind? Could Ayanna Brooks have ever seen this betrayal coming, or was she doomed the moment she opened her arms to people who never deserved her trust? Social media erupted. The hashtag justice for AYANN trended across every major platform. Candlelight vigils were organized from Atlanta to Los Angeles. Donations poured into scholarship funds set up in Ayanna's memory. Murals were painted across city walls. Her smile, once reserved for private moments, became a symbol of something bigger, a reminder of how easily love can be weaponized, how quickly trust can be turned into a target. And yet, through all the noise, all the anger, all the mourning, one truth stood clear. Ayanna Brooks deserved more. She deserved better. And even though the verdict had been delivered, her story would continue to echo in the hearts of millions who would never forget what was taken from her. Even after the trial ended and the headlines faded, Ayanna Brooks' name continued to live on. In October 2024, Kendall Brooks announced the creation of the Ayanna Brooks Foundation, a scholarship fund dedicated to supporting minority nursing students across Georgia. She said it was the only way she knew how to honor a sister who had given so much without ever asking for anything in return. Every year since on the anniversary of Ayanna's wedding day, an annual gala is held in downtown Atlanta. Families, survivors, and supporters gather under twinkling lights, not to mourn her, but to celebrate her legacy. They raise their glasses not to what was lost, but to what she still inspires. At every event, a single candle is placed at the center of the room,